What's up, you guys? Sean Ross Sapp, managing editor, Fightful.com, FightfulMMA.com. It is UFC 230 post-show here on the Fightful Pro Wrestling channel. I know our shows eventually will move to the Fightful MMA and Boxing YouTube channel. The link is in the description below. You can check out all of James Lynch's great interviews as soon as he posts them. Carlos Toro's boxing podcasts. I go live with news updates. Going to go live with a couple of them based on stories we did tonight as well over there. So go subscribe there. You can enter to win a signed Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture photograph. Just subscribe, comment anything on any video. Substantial. Don't just comment. Don't be spamming us. But we will announce the winner of that on the Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz post show, assuming that event actually happens. But UFC 230 did happen. And I am joined tonight by one James Lynch. James, what's up?
What's up, Sean? What a great card, top to bottom. This was quite the event. Glad to be here to talk to you about this one.
Yeah, this was a blast. You talked to several fighters. Can't wait to hear about that. Let's jump right into it, guys. Leave us a thumbs up, subscribe, all that good stuff. FightfulMMA.com. That's where you go for your Fightful MMA news. We're getting news up there faster, quicker, more news than ever before. So make sure you guys check it out. James getting a lot of good stuff. We started off this show with Marcos Rogerio de Lima essentially controlling Adam Wycheck via unanimous decision. This is after we learned that Brian Kelleher and Montel Jackson are off the card. Brian Kelleher made weight, couldn't make it to fight night.
Yeah, food poisoning is what we're hearing, apparently, according to ESPN's Ariel Helwani. Really disappointing because, of course, it was Kelleher's dream to fight at Madison Square Garden. He is a New York native. So just very unfortunate for him because he was looking to bounce back coming off the loss to Lineker. So, yeah, another, sort of last-minute thing that happened. And, this could have been another situation with the New York Commission. They are, we've seen chapped lips prevent a fighter from competing on a card. So hopefully Brian's okay. I was going to reach out to him this week and see what was going on. But if it was food poisoning, that's just unfortunate timing, I guess.
Almost breast implants too in Buffalo.
That's right.
A fight.
Yeah.
I was there for that one. Able to fight. Wycheck ducks underneath and immediately took de Lima down, but de Lima pulled off a really outstanding sweep. I was a little surprised that de Lima didn't stand up more. He was happy with top control. Wasn't a great fight by any stretch. De Lima has alternated wins and losses in all 7 of his fights in the UFC. Didn't do himself any favors as far as getting off of a Fight Pass card, and Wycheck was 2-0 before he took this fight on 2 weeks' notice and drops a boring decision. This was quite a big hit to Wycheck, I think.
Big time, and I think it sort of reveals what we've said about his last two fights. The Arjun Buller fight, he was arguably losing that fight. Buller makes a mistake, he gets submitted. The fight before that, Anthony Hamilton, no longer in the UFC. So those wins don't look so good now because, it wasn't a case of him looking great. It was just that perhaps he fought subpar competition. And de Lima, I just think he looks a lot better at heavyweight. He was fighting at light heavyweight, coming off that loss to OSP, had the win over Jeremy Kimball. But I think this is the right weight class for him, and kind of smart on his part too, because heavyweight's sort of going through a transition right now. Not an outstanding fight, but a good win for de Lima, who I think really, is going to be a guy that's going to try and work his way up the division at this point as it's going through sort of that new influx.
Oftentimes on these prelim shows, a bad fight, or not a bad fight, but a boring fight can snowball into several. That was not the case here. Shane Burgos essentially were doomed Holloway, although he really got hit. They were slugging it out very early on. Very good, tight stuff. And Holloway catches Burgos and drops him, but falls right into the guard and an armbar for the submission. Holloway is now 0-2 in the UFC, went winless on Dana White's Contender Series. Meanwhile, Burgos went over to 4-1. I give my fight recommendations, whether you should watch or pass on these fights every morning when I publish my podcast notes. This one's a must-watch in my estimation. This was just fast, furious, and a lot of fun.
It was. You love fights like this. This is why we watch the sport. You always have to watch it to the very end to see what happens. If someone who just saw Burgos get clipped, you're probably, going to leave the room for a second and think that he's going to get finished. But he comes back, gets a submission. This is a great win for him. A couple things we can take away from this. First off, I think Burgos needed this. This was a lot of pressure on him coming off a loss and fighting, in his home state at Madison Square Garden. So for him to go out there and get this win looks good. He's right back on track. We can't forget last year he finished Charles Rose Barbosa. So he has some pretty good notable victories in the UFC so far. And for Halaba, I think it's just one of those things where it's just he unfortunately is in the UFC sort of at the wrong time. I think he took a lot of damage on the regional scene heading into his UFC debut. And now this is 2 fights where he's, I mean, this is a mistake, clearly. I mean, I think if he could go back and look at this fight again, he probably wouldn't have put himself in that position. But I don't know if he gets a 3rd fight here. It's tough to say. Is he UFC caliber at this point? I mean, 2 losses, 2 finishes in the first round never looks good on the resume. So we'll see what the UFC does after this fight.
Yeah, and he did have a nice run outside of the UFC, but man, it doesn't look good when they give you a shot after Dana White's Contender Series anyway, when you don't pick up a win there and you lose your first 2 fights. It's rough. And I mean, the guys that he was losing to outside of the UFC, we're talking Pat Healy, Steven Seiler, Andre Harrison, Frodo Kospolaev, who are all UFC caliber, or were at the time at the very least. So, and this is his second go in the UFC. He lost to Seiler back in the day. Lando Venata, we said he might need a win to stay relevant. That's not true. He managed to do it with a draw tonight. I guess it's no surprise that these 2 stepped in and threw down immediately. He and Matt Frevola. Lando ate a big head kick, dropped Frevola with 1-2. Frevola's mouth guard came out, which also happened to Venata later on. Venata wasn't setting up his leg kicks at all during this fight, and Frevola was countering accordingly. Just a must-watch round in round 1. And Frevola lands these huge knees and elbows, briefly has a guillotine applied. You could tell after the first round this was going to be something special.
Yeah, this is one of those fights. Doesn't happen often where, a draw or a loss in the case of a fighter, in this case, a draw, the fighter ends up coming out better. And I think, Venata, a lot of people are writing him off, heading into this fight. I know I said on the pre-show that I thought this was a fight that Venata clearly should win, but this was another, this is probably the next best thing in terms of him putting on a good performance. There were moments in the fight where I felt like he could have finished Frevola, but credit to Frevola, who ends up, hanging in there and almost finished Lando as well at certain points in this fight. I'm surprised they went with the draw. I personally thought Frevola won the fight, but either way, I think this was an entertaining fight for both guys. I don't think you can really, oftentimes when we have a draw, it's usually very disappointing. This wasn't the case. This was actually a very entertaining fight, and I imagine both guys will be back in the UFC next.
Yeah, this was a blast. I thought Felder was a little rough on this call. He seemed pretty biased towards Lando Venata, which I didn't think he even tried to hide. In the first 70 seconds of round 2, Venata got caught with 2 big punches to the head, a couple to the body. Somehow, after all of the flurries that happened, Frevola was able to put together some really nice combination. This was stand and bang mode on EA UFC 3. That's what it was. A majority draw. What did you think of the decision?
Yeah, I thought Frevola should have won the fight. I had him winning 29-28, but a draw as well. When you have a fight like this that is very close, there, both guys had their moments. I'm not upset with it. It's not, I'm not going to be outraged about it, but I think this is just one of those things where if you're fighting Lando Venata, you're going to be in a close fight. I mean, Venata's had a draw already against Bobby Green. He's had some close fights before, so that's going to happen. And for Frevola, obviously, again, I think both guys, their stock went up from a fight like this, even though it didn't end up as a draw, just because it was so entertaining. So we'll see what the UFC does next, and we'll see it with what happens with both these guys. I hope that Venata doesn't get cut after this, because I know he hasn't won a fight in quite some time.
Lyman Good puts away Ben Saunders, man, and this is the time for Lyman Good to go on his run. He missed 2 years, then he came back, lost a full year essentially. They just stepped in and tested each other in the clinch. James, this was unbelievable, and somebody was going to go down. They just weren't letting go until somebody went down. Knees from Saunders, uppercuts from Lyman Good. Saunders has dropped, eats some hammer fist. That's a wrap, James.
Certainly was. Lyman Good striking on point in this one, able to land on Saunders a couple times. And this was a great win for him. And, to do it on a big stage in New York, again, he's a Tiger Schulman's fighter. I think the only Tiger Schulman's fighter tonight that actually picked up a victory. So for him to, Burgos, I guess, did as well. But Good nonetheless, needed a big win like this and sort of put the spotlight back on him because, like you said, he had the layoff, he had the USADA suspension, he had all these other things that sort of held him back. And again, I go back to the Ultimate Fighter where, he lost lost, and Dana White said, oh, it's because that guy's from Bellator. So for him to put on a performance like this is great. For Saunders, I mean, I don't know what he has left at this point. He's, I know he beat Ellenberger in his last fight, but there's a couple fights now where he's kind of going into that scary territory, getting finished pretty brutally. So I don't know what they do with him at this point, but for Lyman Good, great win, and hopefully we'll see him back sooner rather than later, so he can get some momentum, like you mentioned off the top there.
Yeah, Lyman Good is, like I said, it is time for him to make his move. What do you think happens with Ben Saunders? He's lost 4 of his last 5.
He might get one more here. Give him another veteran at this point, or maybe they go the prospect route. I don't know, but I don't think there's much left for Ben. Ben really doesn't have to prove much anymore, anyways. He's fought in the UFC, fought in Bellator, he's fought everywhere, and at this point, I think he's not anywhere close to being a title shot guy or anything like that. So I think at this point, it's either give him a notable veteran or give him an up and comer and see if he has enough left to compete in the UFC. Because right now there's a bit of a question mark there.
Sergio Moraes' decision, Julio Arce, and this was a bloodbath. My God. We had somebody saying, didn't catch the prelims. What painted up the canvas? It was this fight. I hate to rag on Felder again, but an unwritten rule of broadcasting is to not say, what happened? What happened? While you've got it on a screen. And Felder did that after Moraes dropped him with a hook. Moraes withstands, Arce withstands the stacking and ground strikes and gets to the back. Just blood everywhere. And Arce gets dropped again towards the end of round 2. But this was just a domination, essentially, and one fighter controlling the other, James.
Huge win for Moraes. I was very impressed by this. Arce was on a roll heading into this fight. If you remember, he had some the win over Tamer and then the win over Dan Ige before that. So for him to lose a fight like this, again, an entertaining fight, very impressive for Moraes. And I think, kind of vindicating for Moraes as well. If you remember when he had his UFC debut, who did he have to fight on short notice? Oh, that was Zabit Sharapov or whatever. So that's a tall task. Second straight win here. He's a guy to keep an eye on in the featherweight division for sure. And for Arce, split decision. It's not like he got finished here. He'll be back, I'm sure. But it's been a while since he's lost. I think he had something like a I'm looking at my thing here, a 7-fight win streak. So, for him, I'm sure he'll get back on the horse after this one. But great fight overall. Love seeing matchups like this.
Number 4, Sijara Eubanks outpoints number 7, Roxanne Modafferi. Sijara Eubanks misses weight, so I guess it's a good thing she was not in the main event of tonight's fight, James.
Yes, it was. Man, I mean, could that have gone any worse? And the fact is, like, Sijara, she trains in New York. It's not like she's taking a long ass flight from somewhere across the world, so you could blame it on jet lag or something. Like, she should have made weight for this fight. Any chance of any talk of her fighting for a title anytime soon is out the window, even though she got the win here tonight. I mean, if you can't make weight, there's repercussions for that. I talked a little bit about this, on Friday, just saying that they might give her the John Lineker treatment, which is, you're winning in your weight class, but you're not making weight. So it's time for you to bump up a weight class. That might happen here with Sijara, but we'll see what they do. But did I not say it on the pre-show? Sijara by decision. I figured that was going to happen here, in terms of this fight. And I thought that decision prop was a steal. She gets it done. This wasn't surprising to me at all. Roxanne Modafferi, it's a great story of what she's been able to do and, persevere and get a win in the UFC. But Sijara was clearly the better fighter, but she's got to make weight. That's unfortunately going to be the story coming out of this, not her win, her missing weight. Yeah,
and we find out about it yesterday, and she was understandably upset that she had the main event pulled from her. But as it turns out, that was a good decision. Eubanks takes Roxanne down, but I thought Roxanne was very active off of her back. And before she went for swinging around for the armbar that she was not going to get on Sijara Eubanks, I thought she was doing much better for herself. She opened herself up to a lot of strikes, and in round 2, she was active on the feet, but she was still swinging with those pillow hands. And as active and as forward as she wasn't doing any damage. She would throw 6 or 7. Sijara would fire back with 1, cracker, and change the way that things were. Eubanks lets Roxanne up, and Eubanks was tired, it looked like, 7 or 8 minutes in. What does that say to you? Ultimately, Eubanks was able to get a second win and took that 3rd round, but could you imagine if that was Shevchenko in there with her?
Yeah, no, I was thinking the same thing when I was watching that fight, because it's like, that's a 5-round fight. Thankfully she got a second win in this one, but I mean, are you going to have that opportunity to get that second win against someone like Valentina? It's tough to say. So, I don't know what's going to happen with her at this point, because again, the UFC's I mean, if you're the UFC, do you want to put her in a high profile fight knowing that there's a possibility of her missing weight? This isn't like Darren Till or Yoel Romero, because I mean, they're much more popular fighters here. And it's not like they've done it twice in 2 fights. I guess Romero did technically, but come on, it's Yoel Romero here. But Sijara, I don't know what they do here with her, because flyweight is completely wide open at the moment outside the title fight. Anyone could sort of, it's up for grabs, so to speak. So, I'll be curious to see what the UFC does. But I mean, this was a good win for her. But again, it doesn't mean anything because she missed weight.
Yeah, Roxanne telegraphed a takedown attempt and got body locked to the mat, got controlled until the end of the fight. Eubanks said she isn't sure what her future was, but man, I don't think it's a good look to deflect the blame like that, like she did. And she said this and that. And I'm like, women all throughout the history of MMA have made weight when they've had issues. And when she says, oh, why don't you all come in here and do it? Well, that's not our job. It's her job. Your job at most jobs is to come into work on time. If you're late all the time, guess what happens? You get fired. It's no different than, missing weight. It's the same thing. Yeah. You all can pass on watching this one. Eubanks' next fight might be worth watching because there might be stakes to it. But she essentially removed the stakes from this fight. She could have very well been in line to get the next title shot, but she pretty much eliminated that. I don't know how you could trust Sijara Eubanks to do this. I would have her fight Nico Montano next. I mean, that's and just assume that fight's not going to happen. Well, just you have to put on the fight card TBA because you don't know what's going to happen, right? Exactly. Jordan Rinaldi, he dominated Jason Knight on the ground. Wow. Joe Rogan always flips out when mission control is applied. Like every time, here it is, mission control, which is a fantastic way to control someone until you move out of mission control, and that's virtually it. Like I very rarely see anything set up from there. I know he tried Noma Plata once, but that's it. Rinaldi did such a great job switching from a body triangle when Knight was on his side over to hooks when he is on his back. This continues throughout the entire fight until Knight at one point tried to spike Rinaldi. This was all Jordan Rinaldi. What a fall from grace for Jason Knight. I mean, here's a guy who had a 4-fight win streak, including that impressive win over Chaz Skelly at UFC 211, and now he's lost 4 fights in a row. But I got to give full credit to Jordan Rinaldi. I did not expect a performance like this out of him, especially after that loss to Gregor Gillespie. I think him moving down to featherweight, I think was, paid dividends in this matchup here. And he looked great. You mentioned the ground skills. I thought it wasn't even close. It just looked like someone who was, on a different level competing. And, I think this was a big win for him. A guy, like I said, who had a good UFC debut. Had a not so good UFC debut, had a good second fight, and then had a bad fight in his third fight. So now it's like he's alternating between wins and losses. Let's see if he can string together some wins off a performance like this. But getting a win over Jason Knight on your resume always looks good. So this is a big win for Jordan Rinaldi. Main card time, and it was a very good main card. Oh boy, was this a fantastic main card. Last style bender, Israel Adesanya, who you spoke to on Fightful's new YouTube channel. Check it out, guys. Link in the description below. Subscribe to our new MMA and boxing YouTube channel. Defeats number 6, Derrick Brunson. And I thought that the way that Adesanya approached this win afterwards was brilliant. He said he was either going to come out really cautious like he did against Silva, or really reckless and dumb like he did against Whitaker. And he did both because I made him do both. This was really, really fantastic. Brunson pushed Adesanya against the cage. And James, one thing I really liked was that Adesanya let Herb Dean know that it was a problem that Derrick Brunson was holding onto the cage. He was very audible about that. He said, check it out. Stop it. I'm not dealing with this. That's good. More fighters should do that. Yeah. He went a little Diaz in this fight, which I liked. I thought that was good. Showing a little bit more personality here. This was a great performance. I mean, this couldn't have gone any better for Israel. First round finish on a huge card like this in New York. It was a dream of his to compete at Madison Square Garden. He talked about it in our interview. This guy's a star. I mean, I'll say this right now. This is a guy that if you're the UFC, you put all your marbles in this guy. He can talk, he can fight, he can do it all. And, we saw him. What I love about his last couple of fights, especially, is like, the last fight against Tavares, we really got to see him go into deep waters and display a variety of his skill set. In this fight, it was, can he handle the wrestler? He didn't even need to worry about that because he finished him in the first round. This was just an incredible performance from Israel Adesanya. And I don't know what you do with him next, but if someone was to say he fights the winner of
Calvin Gastelum and Robert Whittaker, I would have no issues with that.
No problem with that at all. I would be completely fine with that. You look at the way that this middleweight division is, and there are 2 people in the top 10 that have 3-fight winning streaks. That's him and Paulo Costa, and they both have 4-fight winning streaks. And this was just really, really good. Derrick Brunson started to wade in, leap in for takedowns and strikes after that separation where he lost his position. And then he just got his head mashed down on every stuff. And Adesanya started to pick Brunson apart. Strikes at range, or straight punches at range, jumping knees. Finally, the ref steps in. Adesanya did exactly what he needed to do. And you're looking at a guy who, just since February, the last 9-10 months, 4-0 in the UFC, James. That's outstanding.
Yeah. And what a year for him. Like, I forget that he just made his debut this year. Like, it's not like something where, you know, he's been around for a while. I mean, this guy is clearly, I mean, there's been a lot of good performances this year, but as far as fighter of the year goes, I mean, he's got to be up there. 4 wins in a row, especially his last 2 fights, taking out Tavares and Brunson. Very impressive. Just, I don't know. Again, sometimes the UFC gets lucky with some of their fighters. I think they struck gold with this guy. There's so much to like about Israel Adesanya. If someone hates him, you need to tell me a reason why, because, you know, I see a lot of people saying he's cocky. He backed it up. If you're cocky and you're overconfident and you back it up, that is a recipe for superstardom. And again, I think this guy he couldn't have had a better win tonight. And that's a highlight reel we're going to be seeing for a while over a guy in Derrick Brunson who's had some good wins and had some notable fights. So this is a big win for him.
I am very excited to add to the new MMA and boxing YouTube the isolated clip of Adesanya running from a bee during your interview with him.
Okay, that's right. Yes.
One of
you can dodge it all. Yeah. One
of the all-time great moments in MMA interview history is Adesanya walking around with his phone and a bee attacking him. Oh my God, that was fantastic. If you're Adesanya, he says he's top 5 now. I believe it. And we talk about the ever-changing middleweight division that might be changing more. And we've seen Vitor retire. Anderson pulled from the rankings because of a USADA thing that really wasn't his issue. You've got Machida hitting the bricks. He's gone. Bisping retired. So and Thiago Santos is about to leave the division probably. David Branch is falling out of the top 10, I would think, right now. Brunson's tumbling down in that division. Rockhold might be leaving. Who knows what Romero's going to do? The middleweight and light heavyweight divisions, they're just changing and changing and changing. It's nuts. So Adesanya is coming along at the right time, I think.
Yeah, and I think the division needs him too. There's a lot of question marks right now with what's going on as it's sort of going through this influx. You know, Rockhold might be moving up. You've got this title fight, which was finally announced, but I mean, who knows if either of those guys are going to make it at this point. I mean, Whittaker's had so many injuries. To me, the timing couldn't be better because I don't want to go off on like a huge rant here, but, we talked last week a lot on the show, on the Fightful MMA podcast about, Demetrius Johnson leaving and how, people didn't appreciate him enough, but that's because they didn't have someone in their division that really made you want to tune into that division. And the UFC plays the blame for that too. But I think Adesanya could be that guy for middleweight. We had that years ago with Anderson Silva when Chris Weidman was champion. Really not a lot going on. He doesn't have a huge personality, but now you've got this Adesanya guy. I really think they got to capitalize on this and take advantage of it. And every division needs, a mouthpiece. I think Adesanya is their guy.
I think they should book him on that Australia show.
Yep.
Just in case. And maybe the guy I book him against is Anderson Silva.
Yeah.
That's a fight that people will pay attention to. If they don't know Adesanya, they will. And worst case scenario, you have Anderson Silva win, and the UFC would just love to pop him into a main event just because, just to do it. If something happened and he managed to starch Adesanya, which I don't see happening at this stage.
Yeah, I don't mind that fight. When I first heard that, I was kind of like, Anderson, he beat Brunson, so it's like you kind of say like it's a step back, but he's still a name, I guess. And for Adesanya, as much as he's earned a spot at the title, there's no rush to get him there either. So you could do sort of a filler fight while you wait for this the title fight. And then, like you said, if something falls through, you can just slot him in there. So that might not be a bad idea, actually. But I know there's another fight we got to talk about in here too, where that could play some implications as well. So we'll see. But either way, again, it's good to be Israel Adesanya tonight.
It's going to be Carl Roberson tonight, too. He picked apart Jack Marshman, won via unanimous decision. He opened up with long lefts, body kicks, low kicks, up against the fence. He threw some elbows, some nice stuff in the clinch over the top that I liked. Marshman was looking to counter, and every time he did it, he would do it in bunches. And it looked like, man, if some of those land, that could be trouble. But Marshman would swing wide. He got dumped on his back. Almost Von Flue choked himself, which fortunately he didn't, because I do want this show to be I don't want it to be a 2-hour show, and I would go off. But it was pretty clear that Roberson got hurt early in the fight with a kick, and he confirmed as much after the fight. But got a good win, and they're going to keep moving him along. He is a Contender Series alum, so they almost I don't want to say the self-fulfilling prophecy, because you can't decide who wins and loses these fights, but they want those Contender Series guys to do well.
They certainly do. And let's not forget, he also fought in Glory as well. So that's another guy coming over like Adesanya, who's had some success in MMA. And you have to go all the way back to June of 2015, the last time Carl Roberson went to a decision. So you mentioned the injury. I mean, clearly that played a role. And just the fact that I think Marshman's tough as nails. I mean, there's a couple times where, a lot of other middleweights probably would have gone down and got finished. So, credit to Marshman in this fight. But, good win for Roberson. Again, middleweight, like I said, going through a transition period right now. No need to rush a guy like this, 28 years old. Pull him along. Let's see what he's made of. But, it's a good win. I mean, a lot of fighters, if they have an injury, they can't crack it. And he was able to persevere through it and pick up a decision.
It was a good fight. I have a card full of good fights, really. But Jared Cannonier, a guy that you talked to this past week, had some great pro wrestling quotes that I got to use for my Fightful Weekly. I thought he was a very live dog in this fight, but I didn't know how live he was going to be. And Dave Branch maybe has underperformed since joining the UFC, but I don't know that I expected him to be a top 5 middleweight anyway. But when you look at what Jared Cannonier did, a guy who's fought at heavyweight and light heavyweight, and people didn't think that he would make this weight. And quite frankly, when I heard that Rockhold got hurt and Souza was out of this fight and moving up, I assumed that this fight would take place at light heavyweight. Because why wouldn't it? Cannonier fought there last. Dave Branch has fought there before. I'm honestly surprised it wasn't offered there. But all things considered, it's good. We saw that Jared Cannonier could make the weight. We saw that he could overcome adversity in this fight. Branch landed a power double with ease and just kept taking down Cannonier. Cannonier would get up and throw in some elbows, get taken down. I thought he was okay on the separation, but he kept getting taken down. Then all of a sudden, he cracks Dave Branch, who had tried to feint a takedown and follow up with a hook, and just finished the fight. And he was a huge baby face in New York against Dave Branch, who's from the area. This was a career night for Jared Cannonier. And when you talk to him, he said, listen, I know I've lost quite a few fights, but they're against really good fighters, and I'm a really good fighter. I think he proved it tonight.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because Dominic Reyes' manager tweeted out something like, "Oh, it just shows how good Dominic Reyes is." Like just talking about the Cannonier, performance tonight. But I love this fight. I love a good underdog story. We talked about this on the pre-fight show. The line was a little off on this one. I'm going to read you some prop bets here. Just were pretty incredible. Sure. Cannonier wins in round 2. Prop was plus 1275. Cannonier wins by TKO KO. Prop was plus 590. I mean, I know David Branches look good, but I mean, he's getting up there in age. This is a big opportunity here for Jared. And, I talked about it too. Branch had so much pressure in this fight. He lost out on the Yoel Romero fight and on the Jacare Souza fight. He's fighting in New York. Everyone's expecting him to win. He's this huge favorite. Cannonier, he's got a couple losses, but he wasn't expected to win this fight. Now he's got a huge win here. He's brought new life in the, the theme tonight we've been talking about, the middleweight division going through an influx. He's another guy you can add in that list. I thought this was a good win for him. Coming from a good camp at the MMA lab, this is a really impressive performance, taking out a guy in Branch. And it's funny how things can flip around, because now Branch is as impressive as that he had that win over Santos. Now he's lost 2 of his last 3 fights by stoppage. So, where does Branch go from here? That's the big question. And at 37 years old as well. And you get Cannonier, he's no spring chicken either. He's 34 years old and had lost 3 of his last 4. So there was a possibility that if he lost even on short notice, they probably would have kept him around as a favor because he took the fight on short notice, but it doesn't look good. But this does look good. It looks very good. And Jared Cannonier is somebody, I think that win over Ian Cutelaba is better than, it will age a lot better than anybody realizes.
And that's when I looked at him and I was like, all right, not bad. And I mean, yeah, he's fought a little bit everywhere. I remember years ago when our main live coverage guy, David Tees, he would cover Alaskan Fighting Championship at like 2 a.m. I'm like, whoever came out of there? Well, Jared Cannonier did. He came out of Alaskan Fighting Championship. A great win for him. We do have a reaction piece on FightfulMMA.com. Make sure you guys check that out, as well as the Fightful MMA podcast every Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern. Myself, James Lynch, Showdown Joe go live. Joe is a certified MMA judge and referee, so he's got unique insight to that. James talks to dozens of fighters every single month, so make sure you guys check that out. Tuesdays, 2 p.m. Eastern. Jacare Souza starched Chris Weidman. This was a fight, James. And I thought Veneta and Frivola had a lot for fight of the night. Not so much. These two guys came in and delivered.
Great fight. I loved everything about this fight. It sort of had that, you could see the tide turning on either side at certain moments. The striking was good. Both guys got cracked. I mean, Weidman still gets hit a lot, and unfortunately it cost him in this fight. I think towards the end, Souza getting a shot over the head and just, rocked Weidman. Bad stoppage, by the way. We got to point that out. Mergliata, I mean, Weidman's clearly out. Yeah. Mergliata kind of has that hesitation. And then Jacare hits him again after that. And it's like, he's out. Like, everyone on planet Earth can see this except for Dan Mergliata. So I don't know what happened there. But, this was just, it's unfortunate for Weidman, but this was just a great fight. I think this is one of those fights we'll look back on as one of the best fights of the year, in my opinion. I just like the way that the back and forth, because, I mean, these guys are getting up there in age. Jacare is 38, Weidman's 34. The fact that they were able to put on a performance like that at their age was just remarkable. And, we forget how good Jacare Souza is. He has a split loss to Calvin Gastelum. He got knocked out by Whitaker, but this is a huge win for him. And poor Chris Weidman, I think 1-3 now in New York. New York hasn't been very, very nice to him. He got the win over Gastelum and then lost to Mousasi, Romero, and now Jacare tonight. I don't know where Weidman goes from here. I have some ideas. Maybe we can talk about that after. But in the meantime, huge win for Souza, who may very well get a rematch against Whitaker, assuming Whitaker beats Calvin Gastelum. It's
weird to think of Chris Weidman as this 34-year-old guy who's been through the ringer, because I remember him as a 26, 27-year-old prospect and even a 28, 29-year-old champion. Let's walk through this fight. Jacare slinked forward to start. He wanted to get low, but got caught with a lot of jabs and kicks. Chris Weidman looked great opening up, and Jacare got countered a lot when he threw. Weidman found some success in the clinch. Jacare seemed really one-dimensional with that overhand, and Weidman shook Jacare up with a combo on a right. Jacare finally landed one of those overhands after getting cracked, started to switch up to the body, and Weidman started off round 2 and control again with the knees. I noticed, James, when either one of these guys would open up, there wasn't really an exchange. There was maybe one counter, but each guy would just cover up. So it seemed like the guy who could sustain the longest flurry was in charge of things. We saw that especially with Jacare in round 2, where he just opened up. And then when Weidman covered up to the head, Jacare went to the body over and over again. That's where the tides really started to turn, I thought, in the third round. Even and also there was that beautiful just roll that Jacare did out of the takedown. Just immediately was like, nope, I'm back up on my feet. We're good to go. A knee to the body in the third round sets up the beginning of the end for Weidman, and Jacare just catches him in the temple, cracks him, eyes roll in the back of his head. Everybody saw it, but Dan Mergliata, as you mentioned, Jacare even. So at that point, I'm like, okay, maybe Mergliata didn't see what we saw, but I'm like, no, Jacare saw it. And Jacare's sitting there like, come on, what are we doing here? Fine, if I have to.
Yeah.
And finished Weidman. That was unfortunate. First off, let's talk about the win for Jacare Souza. For Jacare, this is obviously huge because he's been a guy who over the last couple of years, he beat Tim Boetsch and Derrick Brunson, but those aren't exactly the tip-top guys. He beat Vitor Belfort. Vitor was still something in 2016, but he lost to 2 guys that he needed to beat, especially, or 3 guys rather. Romero, Whitaker, Gastelum. The 3 guys that if you want a title shot, you're going to have to beat those guys. He wasn't able to do it. Where do you see his future going, especially at 37?
There's a lot of options for him at this point. I think with the magnitude of this card, it being the co-main event, him finishing Weidman, I think you could make the case for a title shot. Now, the thing is, His last loss was to Gastelum, and that was in May. So if Gastelum wins, I don't know if you're so eager to do that. Now, Whitaker, he lost to him in April of last year, so that might make a little bit more sense. But you never know what the UFC is thinking. The other option is, what about Israel Adesanya? I mean, that could be the co-main event of that title fight if you think about it, because, I think, Israel's earned it. And I think Jacare certainly has earned himself, close to a title shot at this point. The only risk there is, I would seriously feel that way, is that, there's a chance that Adesanya could lose that fight. And I think at this point, you want to get him to that title shot and then see how he does. You don't want to give him a guy like Jacare necessarily, who's dangerous everywhere and has more ways to beat you. I mean, going from Derrick Brunson to Jacare, I think, is a bit of a jump. So we'll see. But again, Adesanya keeps beating these guys the way he does. You never know. To answer your question, I think either a title shot or I think a top contender, or the other guy is Paulo Costa, because I don't want to see Costa and Adesanya fight. They're two prospects. Let those guys have different paths to their title shot. So you could always do that as well. But either way, good for Jacare Souza. But kind of bizarre, though. He's like alternated between wins and losses in his last 4 fights. And, the wins, Tim Boach, Belfort, Brunson. I mean, nothing crazy. But this is probably the biggest win he's had in the UFC.
Yes, there's a lot to unpack with this. As we mentioned, Adesanya in the fold. I think by now, if UFC hasn't figured out the formula, whatever title fight you have, you need at least 2 fights underneath that top 10, top 15, because you might have a situation where, like, say Lewis and Cormier, say that fell out. You honestly needed another heavyweight fight underneath this. They couldn't because it was short notice. But the middleweights are a good example. They had that stacked up and they were able to put people in and move things around. You need that to save some of these cards. Chris Weidman, it really seems like ever since he knocked out the greatest striker in middleweight history, that his wrestling maybe hasn't been employed the way that it used to. At times it has been, but he doesn't really utilize that to the level. Now, granted, against the Jacare Souza, maybe that's not what you want to do. But what do you think? I mean, his game has changed completely.
I don't know what you do with Weidman at this point, but I mean, the stats are there. 1 in 4 in his last 5 fights. I don't know what to say there. Like, what do you do with him at this point? He can't obviously compete with the higher levels. Now, granted, if this fight goes to the scorecards, it's probably pretty close, because I don't know about you, but I scored it 1 apiece heading into that third. So
2 judges had it 2018 for Weidman.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, which surprised me.
Yeah. Well, New York. I don't know.
That's a good point.
But nonetheless, I'm going to throw something out here, and I might get a lot of crap for it. Weidman, I know he's not a huge middleweight. Maybe 205 might be the better weight class for him at this point, only because, I mean, what is he really going to do at this point at middleweight? We've talked about all the newcomers coming through at this point. I don't know what you do with him now. Is that cut factoring into the fact he's getting hit and getting knocked out? I don't know. It's tough to say. I know Rockhold for sure should fight at 205. Maybe Weidman should follow that course as well, too, because, again, it's a new division. Maybe he doesn't, the weight cut won't impact him so much, but I don't know. We'll see. But either way, I mean, at this point, he is not a top contender anymore, losing a fight like this. I know, again, he could have won this fight if he just would have not got knocked out, but, 1 in 4, you can't ignore that.
We've also got a lot of people in the live chat, thank you guys, asking what if the UFC comes to their senses and they do develop a 165-pound, 175-pound division. You think an Adesanya can make 175?
I don't know. That's interesting.
There'll be a lot of chips that fall if that weight division goes down. We know a bunch of people who can make 165, but we don't know anybody from 185 really who can drop to 175. Whitaker could, ideally, but he seems to be doing damn well at 185. Like, why even mess around with it?
That's a tough one, because I think part of them making new divisions, if they were to go that route, is you have to think who is there someone that could be a champion that's not a champion right now that would really, give attention in that division, right? Like with 155 or 165, I mean, the obvious choice is McGregor or Kevin Lee or someone that obviously cuts a lot of weight, and it would sort of meet that there. But yeah, could an Adesanya make 175? Could Weidman? I mean, if Weidman drops and makes the weight, are people really going to be like, I can't wait to see that division because of Chris Weidman? Probably not right now. His stock's never been lower. So I don't know. It's tough.
Reminder, guys, you can check out our premium service, FightfulSelect.com. Heavy on the pro wrestling content, but I do have some MMA content up there as well. If It Were a Work, If It Were a Shoot podcast monthly. UFC rankings breakdown weekly. We do alternate fight commentary once a month as well. Lots of early access to stories as well. We got the main event. Derrick Lewis versus Daniel Cormier. Daniel Cormier looking to make history, and something that I hadn't realized, James, looking to become the first man to be able to defend 2 titles in different weight classes. And I just assumed that Randy Couture had, because every fight he had for like years was a title fight. Not necessarily the case. He made history tonight. And before we even get into the fight, going into this night, where did you rank Daniel Cormier all time among heavyweights?
Oh yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I'd say I'm one of those old school guys where I still think Fedor, his body of work, I mean, speaks for itself. And don't give me this crap about, oh, and Pride he didn't fight. I mean, Pride had the best heavyweights back when he fought, and
great heavyweights.
So I still think Fedor is the greatest of all time. He's got to be right behind there at this point. And actually, well, to answer your question, heading in, I mean, it's tough because he only had, I guess he had the wins in Strikeforce, so you could count those. Beating Stipe, and Stipe's body of work himself is impressive. I mean, I would have to put him at number 2 at this point. It's tough because Kane also had a good run, but he just, it was just so short that it's tough to really look back and compare the two. I'd probably put Cormier at 2 still, even with like Fedor to me is still the best.
Reminder, guys, check out our new Fightful MMA and Boxing YouTube. Link is in the description below. Subscribe, leave a comment on any of our videos, be registered to win the signed Chuck Liddell Randy Couture photograph. Show your boys at Fightful some love. Eventually, our podcast will be over there. Right now, we're going to keep them on the pro wrestling channel as we build up that MMA channel. But James has a ton of interviews over there. Derrick Lewis apparently hurt Daniel Cormier, if Cormier is to be believed. But you really couldn't tell it. There was a leg kick landed and maybe a punch towards the end when Cormier came in. Close call and a head kick. But other than that, it was Daniel Cormier wrestling domination. A high single leg, dragged him down. I mentioned on our preview on Tuesday, it was impressive that Derrick Lewis had Gabriel Gonzaga on his back, and he's just like, well, I'm going to stand up. But he did that with Cormier too, which is just as impressive, even though Cormier went on to control him. But he wasn't able to overcome that in the second round, and Daniel Cormier choked him out. Regardless, and Cormier took this fight because he matched up well with Lewis. This is still real impressive, man. Volkov put the pain on Derrick Lewis for 3 rounds and couldn't put him away. Daniel Cormier, it was not a problem, James.
Yeah, there's levels in this division and in in a lot of divisions where it just shows the level of talent. And Cormier is just a step above. And he even said it post-fight. He's like, Derrick Lewis is a great fighter, but he's just, I don't know if he used the word levels, but he just said that there's sort of different skill sets in that division. And he looked great in this fight. One thing I wanted to ask you, I'm sure you were going to talk about it, but him talking about Brock with the WWE Championship, were you like the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland when you heard that?
Yes, because that is the one positive that can come of Brock Lesnar winning that championship that almost nobody, I'm talking like based on the reception we got, about 95% of fans did not want him winning that title yesterday. So the fact that he has it and Daniel Cormier is saying, yeah, bring it on over here. And the thing is, Daniel Cormier would do it and would fully be like, yeah, you know what? I'll work WrestleMania. Sure. I'll do that. I can put something together real quick and Braun Strowman run through him in like 2 minutes. He's business like that. A good person to go back and look at is Muhammad Ali. He would get in the ring with Gorilla Monsoon, and you would think a guy like Muhammad Ali is going to have a big ego. He's not going to let some fat wrestler boss him around. Oh, no. Muhammad Ali jobbed out for Gorilla Monsoon, took the airplane spin, got his ass whipped. I get the feeling that's what Daniel Cormier would do too, because he likes the entertainment side of things. He understands it. So when I see that, I'm like, oh, okay. And a lot of people suspected that Brock would be there. I figured it'd be very hard. He was in Saudi Arabia yesterday.
Yeah, I didn't think it was possible.
I find it hard that he would be in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia Friday, New York Saturday. Even if it were possible, he would have hit somebody with the old piss off mate with one of those. That's not Brock Lesnar's style, essentially. But Brock Lesnar versus Daniel Cormier seems the next matchup. If for some reason he were to lose, the UFC wouldn't have been too bummed. They could have booked Brock Lesnar and John Jones. No big loss there. I think this is a legit super main event that's going to do like 1 million. Well, anything with Brock's going to do 1 million buys. But I think for the last couple of years while Connor's been gone and John's been out and GSP sidelined, but still out before that. He was around for one fight. I think Cormier's been the UFC's biggest star for the last year or so.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge fight. This is already an early Christmas present for the UFC for next year in terms of having this fight. Thank God Cormier won, because we're gonna see it happen. It's got to happen. The question is, when does it happen? I know they announced that card in Vegas on March 2nd. Maybe you push it then, or maybe you do it a little bit earlier. I don't know where they're you could do Super Bowl weekend, I guess, too. I didn't check all the dates, but I'm sure they're gonna that'll be in its own card. And one other thing I wanted to mention: thank God they didn't do Brock over Skype. To kind of Skype in or something like that, because you remember they did that with, I think it was Henan Barrow, and they tried to do like a trash talk, and the connection didn't look as good. So, thank God they didn't do something like that, huh?
I forgot all about that.
Yeah.
That's a very Bellator thing to do.
Yes.
These days too.
Yeah.
So UFC 230, I thought it was a classic show. Just a ton of great fights, a ton of great moments, comeback wins. You had prospects winning. You had all-time greats on the show. You had Fight of the Year candidates, 2 of them. What will be your lasting memory years from now when somebody says UFC 230? What do you remember from the card, not the lead up? Because, we could have had Diaz and Poirier on here too, and who knows how we'd be talking then. But what will be what you think of?
I know people are sick of me talking about it, but it's Adesanya. I think this is the fight we're going to look back on. This was his big moment, his big stage, and I think big things are ahead for him. I think this is the card you're going to look at. You're going to remember him, making that debut at Madison Square Garden, and really impressing over Derrick Brunson, because there were people that thought that Brunson's wrestling could take care of business, but Adesanya put on a beautiful performance, and I just think that he sort of stole the show, in my opinion.
Guys, I want to thank you all so much for joining us. You can join us every Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern. Fightful MMA podcast. It's a good time. We preview shows, review shows, talk about the MMA news, but I post MMA live updates on that new YouTube channel. Hit up FightfulMMA.com. We're getting stories up faster than ever. Check it out. We have a bunch up there from tonight. We have live coverage of the press conference over on Fightful MMA. And let's go ahead and talk a little bit about that. Dana White says he's working on boxing deals right now. What do you make of that?
Until it happens, it happens. I was at the press conference with Mayweather and McGregor, and Dana's wearing the Zuffa shirt, and I haven't heard a peep about boxing since anything officially booked. And didn't you hear him also say that I'm going to go after the top boxers? Like, where's this money coming from? So until we actually see this happen, and they got to compete with DAZN. I saw they're going after Golovkin. I think now. I mean, this is
going after a lot of people, James.
That's what I'm saying. So I think that's one of those things where until it's actually booked, I'm not even going to listen to that. It's just it's nonsense as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, DAZN's trying to make some moves, so I hear. Dana White has no comment on Nate Diaz. Says, I actually forgot he was supposed to be on the card. Says they have an opponent in mind for Izzy, but it's not Rockhold. Dana will not compare Adesanya to Conor, but said that he talked to Conor for an hour last week, wants a rematch with Khabib, but will fight whoever. That's good news. That's really great news for the UFC that Conor McGregor is willing to fight whoever.
Yeah, they have to. I've said this over and over again. You can't give him the Khabib fight. I know it'll do great numbers, but McGregor loses 2 fights. You lose a lot of your stock here. Give him Justin Gaethje. I think that's a good fight for him, a winnable fight, in my opinion. Do something smart with that. And the Diaz stuff, I mean, that's... I think, again, the only guy Diaz knows what his worth is, and I think actually maybe McGregor and Diaz is the time to do that fight too. Either way, I think you got to be careful with McGregor going forward. So we'll see what happens. And why would Adesanya fight Rockhold? Rockhold's coming off a loss. To me, you got to give him someone who's cut their stock. Send Rockhold to 205 now. Cormier's out of the division. Let's make things interesting. Can you imagine a Luke Rockhold and John Jones fight? How great would that be?
We have a super original comment in the live chat. Someone comparing your looks to Dean Ambrose, if you would.
I've never heard that. Believe it or not. That's crazy. So,
wow, man. Yeah. Dana does not know what's next for Weidman and Lewis, but says he's going to start working on fights for 2019 on Tuesday because this card had a lot to do with what they're going to do early in the year. He's asked about Ben Askren and said, if I hated you so bad, what did I do the deal? Now, come on. Askren was still literally blocked until tonight on Twitter by Dana White. Dana White says that he will not try to convince Cormier to stick around if he wants to retire. And he says if he thinks he's done, he's done. Usually, Dana White is good about that, although they did pull Derrick Lewis out of retirement. Dana White does say often, oh, when somebody's done, they're done. But Derrick Lewis said he was done, and then they offered him a fight 2 weeks later.
Yeah, it's MMA. You can't, the word retirement just should not go in MMA, because we've seen so many guys come back, and just, again, until we don't see him for a while, until they're on a milk carton, we can't find them. I think that's when you can start talking retirement when it comes to fighters.
Not sure what's going on with Brock. Doesn't know if he's next for Cormier, but surprised at how easily Cormier dominated. Israel Adesanya is up there now. Head over to FightfulMMA.com and Fightful MMA on Twitter for that. James, tell the people what you're up to and where they can follow you on social media.
At Lynch on Sports, Twitter, Instagram, easiest place to find. Find me, I should say. And I just posted an exclusive interview tonight. Julian Erosa is going to be fighting on the Denver card next week. Talked to him tonight about getting that short notice call. He's going to be taking on Devontae Smith. Lots of good content for UFC Denver this week on Fightful. Again, just like the Moncton card, I think we got more interviews than anyone right now. So if you want to get a head start on UFC Denver, which is going to be a pretty good card, check out Fightful.com. Interviews with a lot of different fighters, including just a whole bunch. Just you have to go look on Fightful.com and subscribe to the channel. Sean said it a bunch of times, but we got to get those subs up. Lots of exclusive content over there that you're not going to find anywhere else. So check that out.
Yeah, I'll be quite transparent, guys. We can't monetize it until 1,000. That's important to the growth of Fightful. But I wanted to highlight Carlos, James, and MMA news especially. We got a lot of cool stuff going on there. I'm always adding new content up there. We're going to have clips from our interviews up there as well. Lots of neato stuff. Follow me at Sean Ross Sapp. Done a bunch of podcasts this weekend, both on Fightful Select and Fightful.com. Check them out. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We are on podcast platforms everywhere. iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube. We're downloadable via MP3 at FightfulPods.com. We got iTunes everywhere. Check us out. We're out.